Sunday, it's Beis Tammuz. It's my daughter's birthday. Chaya Mushka, yeah, Baruch Hashem. V'asena Sarah, she'll be Marachem V'shonim. She's special. I'll tell you a cute story. It's a rachmanas on my children because the whole world knows their biography. I had a son in Toronto years ago, and a younger man came over to me and he starts telling me about my son and how wonderful he is. Then he stops. He says, "Wer dein Schwer? Who's your father-in-law?" I said, "My father-in-law is Moshe Nemrev." "Oh, I have nothing to do with you." I take back all the compliment, just not you. Anyway, I'll take the kids with the compliment, without the compliment. Okay, so I should get my alma gesund. We had a Shabbos meal yesterday, and somebody quoted somebody else who said that what made the Rebbe unusual, that he was a sane voice in an insane world. A normal voice in a crazy world. So the whole Fabrengen was, but the older Rebbe was normal, but it's so rare. It's so unusual. The person should not lose his head when the whole world is Meshuggah. So one of the greatest brachas, the bracha from Seichel. Shouldn't be fools. It's serious. Shouldn't be fools. Okay, we're learning Tanya. So it's chus for her nishma. I just want to say that when my daughter was born, so your child's birthday has to be special, right? So some of my kids have like pretty special days. I have a son born on Gimel Tammuz. I have a son born on Tes Kislev. So those are, no-brainers, But Chav Beis Tammuz, what's Chav Beis Tammuz? I looked it up in the Vayem B'Yemei. Chav Beis Tammuz, the yard site of Reb Shlomo Karliner. In Stalin, they make chasanas today, in the 3 weeks. Because by them, yard site is Yom Simcha. He was killed al Kiddush Hashem. He was murdered al Kiddush Hashem. And they say that he was Mashiach ben Yosef. It says in Chazal, it's a complicated thing, and the Rambam holds we cannot know who this is going to be, and we shouldn't research it. But the Psad Yigon, there's two Mashiachs, Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David, and Mashiach ben Yosef was killed al Kiddush Hashem. And they say that Mashiach ben Yosef is the Klein Kaliner. So of course I'm a Chabad skeptic. I don't believe anybody about anything. But I saw it in the Reshima for the Frierdiker Rebbe. He's buried in Ludmir, someplace in Poland. Reb Shlomo. Reb Shlomo was Reb Aaron's Talmud, not his son. Reb Aaron's son was Reb Asher. When Reb Aaron passed away, the Asher was 7. So Reb Aaron's Mamala Mokum was not his son, was his Talmud. Reb Asher, the son of Reb Aaron, was the Chassid of Reb Shlomo Karliner. So Reb Shlomo Karliner was murdered, Reb Asher was Mamala Mokum. So there's a story that they bring in Stalin and Sfarim, that when they ran into a shul on Shabbos and they ran him through, they killed him. But Reb Asher was missing. So he came later and they said to him, "Rebbe, where were you?" He said, "I went to the mikveh to see if he saw that was going to happen." Reb Asher Karliner saw what was going to happen, and he ran to the mikveh to see if he could save his Rebbe. He said, "I could save him." But they would kill 10,000 Jews. They would kill 10,000 Jews. You think about that. These are Peidish Shamaisis of very, very holy people. Very, very holy people. But the Frierdiker Rebbe writes, Oymin Malav Shahaya Mashiach ben Yosef. In his own journal, he's writing to himself. And the Frierdiker Rebbe describes how he went to his tzion. He has a tzion. It's very low, it's very hard to get into. And the Frierdiker Rebbe crept down literally on all four. And he crawled into his tzion to be mishtateach al kivrei. So even though Reb Shlomo Karliner and the Alter Rebbe had their differences, Reb Shlomo Karliner was the famous about talked to the Alter Rebbe about Chabad and Chagas with Tzadik ben Manasseh Yichya, but the Frierdiker Rebbe writes, so my daughter was born on a special day. Baruch Hashem, she married a Lubavitcher and she's a shliach. There's nothing wrong with being a Stoliner, but it's much better to be connected to Nasi Adar, to the Rebbe, the Nasi Adar. But anyway, so that's the gossip in my family. Let's learn Tanya, okay? Let's learn Tanya. Peirik Chof Tes, a new Peirik. Every once in a while, that miracle happens. Now, I used to teach. I don't teach anymore. I used to teach Bachrim. And when I taught Bachrim, when I started out my career, I taught from Yud Zayin till Lamed Daled. So in the beginning, I used to teach everything. I don't know if I was a quicker teacher or I had better students, but as time passed, I could no longer make it to Lamed Daled, so I had to skip. So I used to skip Chav Tes and Lamed. I would skip it. for reasons that I'm going to explain to you when we get to the beginning of Lamed Av. You have to wait a couple of years to find out why I used to skip it. But here we're not in a rush. We can learn Vifum Avil, so we're going to learn Perek Chavtes. The Nekuda is, these two Parakim, Chavtes and Lamed, are the Musar in the Tanya. The rebuke. The Alter Rebbe speaks, he's not just critically, but, I don't know what the right word is, very gvura, very strong. I was in Shul the other day, Nachashtika Lashon Hara, and after davening, so a man lectured me. I get lectures from time to time. I give lots of lectures, so I should get some lectures back. He lectured me that not enough people came to Shul on Yud Beis Tammuz with a kapota, and he was very upset about it. And what upset him the most was that he complained to somebody, how come they're wearing a kapota? The guy told him, in Lubavitch git nish kamuser. In Lubavitch you don't get muser. So I told him a story, which is very sweet. There's a Yid that I know, I heard from him personally, I'm not going to say his name, but he told it to me face to face. In other words, I heard this firsthand. That when he was a bocher, he got married probably in the 70s, late 70s, Mustafa. When he was a bocher, Yechidus was very short. Bochim, Yechidus was a half a minute, very quick. You went in, you got a bracha, you walked out. The Rebbe made him an exception. The Rebbe spent time with him. The Rebbe took him a karav gewesen. He says, every year my Yechidus started the same way. By Chassidim git benish kemuser, aber Chassidim don't give rebuke, but, and then the Rebbe would beat him up for this, that, or the other. This was his regular. This was his, as a bocher. This was the way the Rebbe the Rebbe would start. By Chassidim you don't give muser, but, and then the Rebbe would tell him all the things that he's doing wrong. And he turned out okay upon him. The Rebbe Pashat invested in him. These two prakim are the muser in the Tanya. Now you have to assume that muser in Tanya is Tanya, obviously. But it is the section of Tanya that speaks very Guradik, very powerful. And if those who know, you want to read something in Chassidus, which is strong and bitter, read the Middle Rebbe's Maimor Bachlal, and Middle Rebbe, with a different kind of Rebbe and a different kind of Chassidim. The Alter Rebbe's Chassidim are hard for us to relate to, but the Middle Rebbe is a lot of Gvura. A lot of Gvura. Very powerful, very strong, very intense, and a lot of emotion. Middle Rebbe. The Rebbe, our Rebbe, as you'll see, I mean, like I said to you, we finished Perek Lamed, I'm going to bring in the Maimah, we're going to learn it, I always do it, to a very great extent, said no sadness, no negativity, only positivity, only joy, the only motivator it's going to work. And I know that what I say doesn't matter, but he's right. The Rebbe is smarter than us. And we should really trust him, and we should listen to him. He's thought it through, and he included us in his cheshbonis. I'll tell you a new story. I heard this yesterday in Shul. I'll tell you two Lashon Haras now about the idea of Musar. I gave a shir yesterday afternoon. And after the shir, a young man who's young, he's my father's age, Kemat, came over to talk to me, and he told me something about his own life. And he shared some very personal things. And one of the things he told me was that my mother used to fast. My mother used to fast. And then he starts to cry, and he says, I think she fasted because of the tzaras I gave her. She had many children, very Chassidish kids. He was the youngest, and he was the troublemaker. So she fasted. His father found out that his wife was fasting, and he was really upset about it, but he couldn't stop her. So he took her into the Rebbe as a couple, and he told the Rebbe, my wife is fasting. And the Rebbe told her that she should be mater neder, she shouldn't fast. And the Rebbe said to her, but there is such a thing as a tainis dibur, to be careful what you speak, and to only eat healthy food. So the joke, she used to fast Mondays and Thursdays, so the joke in the family was that if she ever said a Lashon Hara, they would say, today's not Monday and Thursday, right? So the Rebbe told her not to fast. She was fasting. You imagine your mother fasts for you because she wants you to be an Elach Yid. What kind of mother do you have? You know, the kind of mother who's going to fast, she should be an Elach Yid, doesn't even have to fast. The fact that she wants, he told this to me about his mother in America. She fasted as was an Elach Yid. So I said to him, so I guess the fasts work. And then he really got emotional. He started to cry. So that's one story about, the Rebbe told her not to. But the story that really is powerful to me is, there was a chassid by the name of Reuven Dunin, and his name is going to come up in the next two prakim many times, who the Rebbe adopted like a son. Reuven Dunin was a Baal Tshuva. But a Baal Tshuva means he was born frum, very frum. And he went away from Yiddishkeit completely. And he mamish did tshuva, like about tshuva, like you read in the holy books. A man told me, who's younger than Reuven Dunan, that he stood next to him in shul, in yeshiva in Lud, the first Rosh Hashanah after he came back to yeshiva. And he said to me, I never saw a man cry like that in my life. At Pashuk Yiton Tshuva. He did Tshuva like it says in the Sfarim, Ad Mitzvah Nefesh. He came here. And he fell in love with the Rebbe fell in love with him. He had for a while a shir with the Rebbe to learn Tanya, and they learned this Perek Chavtes that I skipped. And he told the Rebbe that every night when he says Kishma Shalamita, he cries. He does Tshuva, Pashut. But Kishma Shalamita, he cries, he does Tshuva. And the Rebbe told him to stop. The Rebbe told him to stop. Because today you have to do Tshuva Simcha. I find this, first of all, this happened a long time ago. This happened probably 65 years ago, a very long time ago. And the Rebbe's obsession with Simcha developed slowly, and the generation that needs to hear the message of Simcha was first being born. Those of us who are so sensitive that the smallest insult breaks us to pieces, and only we could handle it as encouragement and being uplifted. The Jews of that generation were a little tougher than us. And the Rebbe said, today, only Simcha. No atzvus, no meridus, no sadness even from tshuva. And the Reb Shag, the Rebbe's brother-in-law, once asked the Rebbe, it's printed, where the Rebbe took this idea from, that we should only serve Hashem and simcha. And the Rebbe answered him in Yiddish, if you need a source, the source is, for lack of words, I made it up because it's generation specific. It's for this generation. In this generation, you have to have only simcha. So these two prakim are very musadik, they're very strong. And a lot of people would say that the Rebbe doesn't encourage doing the avodah we're going to learn in these prakim, but we're going to learn it anyway, because that's what, when we learn Tanya, we learn every page. The way the Tanya was written is that every person has a different page in the Tanya. The Alter Rebbe calls it Mekoyma Yom Madrigas. Every person has a different page in Tanya. The Tanya has 53 chapters. And then you have 12 more chapters in Sha'ar Yichud V'Emunah, and 12 more and plus a Hakdama. You have 12 more chapters in Igeres HaTshuva. There's a lot of Tanya. And every person has to find the part that talks to him. This one learns from this Perek, this learns from that Perek. Yeah. So the hard part is to figure out which piece of Tanya the Alter Rebbe meant for me. And for this you need wisdom, and you need humility, and you need honesty, and you need help, you need a mashpia. But we don't only learn the piece of Tanya was written for us, we learn all of it. So we're going to learn this also, even though these prakim are musadik. But I will set the stage one more time, okay? The class is 12 minutes and 59 seconds old. And so far, all I did was dance around the bush. It could be worse, actually. Last week was 25 minutes. So, I want to set the stage. And the setting of the stage is very, very important to remember. It's very, very important to remember in terms of understanding, but it's more important to remember in terms of applying the Tanya. And that is that the Tanya really is Yechidus. The Tanya was a transcription, a writing down of various private audiences that the Alter Rebbe had with his Chassidim, who were giants. They were very great men, very great people. And the Alter Rebbe met them one at a time, and they gave each one of them advice, which would give them the trajectory of their life, like it says in the Hayem Yem. Lefi Sheidish Nishmosam, the advice that he gave them was based on the root of their neshama. And the Alter Rebbe took a pen, and he wrote down the Alter Rebbe's own words, Kol HaTshuvis L'chol HaShailas. All the answers to all the questions. The Alter Rebbe says, in this book, every question in Avodas Hashem you have, pneumistic question, not about what's muktzah. Questions that have to do with Hanastaris, with Moyach and Leiv, pneumius, the neshama of a person, are found in the Sefer Tanya Kaddish. And the Chassidim were not happy, as I've told you 100 times. The Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya, the Chassidim were not happy, because they wanted the private interface with the Rebbe rather than a book. And the Alter Rebbe said, I'm sorry, I can't. Ein as man groma oid, it's just not realistic. Now when you say it's not realistic, there's two madregas not realistic. There's not realistic as it was in the later years of Alter Rebbe's physical life, and there's not realistic today. Right? And when the Alter Rebbe wrote those words, he wasn't only talking about the Chassidim who came along in the later years. Alter Rebbe's deceased when he had hundreds and thousands of Chassidim. He didn't have time for each one individually. Alter Rebbe wrote the Tanya for every Jew who learns the Tanya till Mashiach. That's how my Mashpiyim taught it to me, and that's how their Mashpiyim taught it to them, and their Mashpiyim taught it to them until the first Mashpiyah explained the Tanya the first time based on the Alter Rebbe's own directives. So Tanya is really very personal. It's about connecting to the Eibishter. And it's about fighting and conquering the Yetzer Hara. That's really what it comes down to. Now, fighting and conquering the Yetzer Hara is tricky. It's very, very tricky. Yetzer Hara is a Uman b'Melachtei. He's a big expert. And learning how to deal with the Yetzer Hara of 101 stripes. Yetzer Hara's got so many different flavors. And managing the Yetzer Hara, that you should own him, rather than him, chas v'sholom, owning you even for 1 minute, is, so to speak, the underlying teaching that the Tanya is providing. The Tanya is not satisfying itself by helping you fight with the Yetzer Hara. The Tanya is about teaching you how to serve the Eibishter. But of course, serving the Eibishter is about controlling the animal, about putting him in a cage, or using him to help you serve the Eibishter in a way where you control him, and he doesn't control you. That's the design. So different people came to the same Alter Rebbe and teach me how to serve the Eibishter, teach me how to serve God. And the Alter Rebbe did not say the same thing to each person. Alter Rebbe gave different instructions to each person based ultimately on who they were. The Alter Rebbe had Ruach HaKodesh. Alter Rebbe was a Rebbe, a Neshama Klolos, a Nasi B'Yisrael, whatever these things mean. And he was sensitive to the Jewish soul. That's what it means, a neshama, a general soul. And each person got a direction based on who he or she is, bepnimius, the truth of their neshama. You know the story with Reuven Dunan. I mentioned him once, I'll mention him again. That when he ran away from Yiddishkeit, he got involved in building Israel. It was a brand new state. It was very, very active in building Eretz Yisrael. So he used heavy equipment. He drove a tractor, he drove a dump truck, he worked. And when he became a Baal Tshuva, those machines represented to him a tzelem, a cross, avodah zarah mamish, because he was very, very preoccupied with that kind of heavy physical labor. When he walked into the Rebbe the first time, the first words out of the Rebbe's mouth were, "Do you know how to drive a tractor?" And the Rebbe hit him in the stomach. It was the worst thing the Rebbe could have told him, because of the symbolism of the tractor. And what was worse, he had a mashpiyah, he had a real mashpiyah, he had an emes mashpiyah. His mashpiyah was Reb Shlomo Chaim. You could make a good argument that he was the last mashpiyah. Reb Nissen, Reb Shlomo Chaim, it's all we had after the war. Reb Shlomo Chaim was a real mashpiyah, he was a madrich. He taught people how to serve, he taught Bochum how to serve the Eibishter in his way. And Reb Shlomo Chaim had prepared him to go to the Rebbe. Reb Shlomo Chaim had rules. He did not Bochum go to the Rebbe until he felt they were ready. And they hated it for him. They found now a letter from the Rebbe to Reb Shlomo Chaim, where the Rebbe writes to Reb Shlomo Chaim, "Do not send the Bochum here until they're ready." He wouldn't tell anybody this was an instruction from the Rebbe. Instead, the Bochum hated him and they muttered behind his back. They didn't let him go to the Rebbe. All he had to show them was, "Look, the Rebbe told me not to let you go," but that's not the way these people operated. You didn't need information that you didn't need. You don't have to like me, but I'm your teacher, and if you're not, I'm not letting you go to the Rebbe. You're not going. And in those days, you didn't go without permission. It wasn't just you were afraid to be punished because you didn't. Your mashpiyah said no, you didn't go. You didn't like it, but you listened. Reuven was older. He came to yeshiva, was in his mid-20s. Most of the boys were adolescents, teenagers. So when he asked Reb Shlomo Chaim to go to the Rebbe, he said you could go, and he prepared him. He told him how you should behave when you come to the Rebbe, verschiedene Sachen, different things. And amongst the things he told him, you should know, the first words out of the Rebbe's mouth are hira for your whole life. So he comes to the Rebbe, and the first words out of his mouth is, in his thinking, do you have a tzelem, Rachmana litzlan? You have a cross, because the tractor was everything that he had run away from, and the first words, so he falls apart. Like, wow! So the Rebbe's answer, if you read it in his original, he has an autobiographical piece. They made a big book out of his life. But it's based on a few pages that he wrote himself. And the first page, it was printed in about Mashiach many, many years ago. The way I remember it was, He walks into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe asks him, he gives the Rebbe his note, he puts the note down. I mean, I don't remember Yechidus. Do you put it in the Rebbe's hand? Do you put it down? These are details that were very important, but I don't know. You put it down. And the Rebbe asks him, to drive a tractor? So he starts to cry. And the Rebbe's response is in Yiddish, Favos bist du gekommen herz? Why did you come here? Now that's almost even worse than the first. Like what you came here to cry? So he opened up. He writes. I told the Rebbe everything. I had no secrets. And he finished by saying, I came here that the Rebbe should teach me how to do tshuva. And the Rebbe answered him, Früher wird man sich einordnen. Beteira va'aveda besimcha, beteira b'mitzvah besimcha, v'tuv levav, und danach möchten wir reden, sie trachten wegen tshuva. Which means, first you're going to acclimate yourself into serving Hashem, learning Torah, and doing mitzvahs with joy and tuv levav, a good heart, and then we'll think about tshuva. And he felt that 25 years later, was a siyum on Masechta Yuma, the Rebbe made in the Vav Tishrei, was about tshuva, was the answer to the question that he had asked the Rebbe 25 years about doing tshuva. So after the Sikha, he went over to the Rebbe. He was standing on the bleachers, which no longer exist. And he went over to the Rebbe in the middle of the Fabring, and he said, L'chaim, he was special. Reuven Dunner was special. But he spent his whole life driving a tractor. That's the punchline of the story. He was from the first shluchim. Although he didn't get a check from Tzach, he made a living driving a tractor. And he lived in a blue-collar city. He lived in a workman's city. He didn't live in a place of fancy people. He lived amongst people who all did physical labor. And they all had a stereotype about from Yidden that it's beneath them to work. And the Rebbe told him, your job is to drive the streets with the tractor. And they would see a chassid with a beard, with overalls and a hat like that. It melted them. Reuven Dunan literally has hundreds, maybe thousands of bailei tshuva b'poil. He's in a class by himself, very special. So the first words out of the Rebbe's mouth was not a mistake. Because the Rebbe in Yechidus, it's another thing. The Rebbe is talking from a different place. You know how to drive a tractor. To him, he couldn't even understand it. But anyway, I digress. Appreciate, a chassid goes into his Rebbe, and the Rebbe speaks to him, and the hira he gets from his Rebbe is Al Kol HaChaim Kulmas for his whole life. And it's a known tradition by Chassidim. Rabbi Shlomo Chaim used to teach it to his students, but he wasn't the only one who said it. Maybe he's the only one after the Holocaust who was teaching it. But the Chassidim used to say in the olden days, the first words out of the Rebbe's mouth to you are a lesson for you for your whole life. And then the job of the chassid is to actualize it, to do it. And the Rebbe doesn't have Rachmanis. The Rebbe is not a sweet Zayde who makes you feel good. The Rebbe is a Rebbe, which is a very interesting phenomena. It's very hard to, what does the Rebbe mean? It means so many different contradictory things all wrapped into one, but it's a higher kind of a relationship. And if you're a chassid, and not everybody is a chassid, we're all connected to the Rebbe, but not everyone is a chassid, the Rebbe talks to you like a chassid. The Rebbe talks to a chassid. Tells what you have to do, and then you have to figure out how to do it. And Chassidim went into the Alter Rebbe, and Alter Rebbe gave them heroes, taught them how to serve the Eibishter. Each one got a different hero. All of those instructions found their way into the Tanya on this page or on this page or this page based on the Alter Rebbe's own authorship, and then each person had to use the skills the Alter Rebbe, the tools, the direction the Alter Rebbe gave him, plus the skills he had, plus the support of his mashpia, his madrich, his older chassid, to figure out how to implement it into his life. And then we got to chapter 26, which we call troubleshooting. And chapter 26 till 34, these 9 parakim, that's what I call them, the troubleshooting. In other words, you come to the Alter Rebbe, you ask advice, and you can't do it. So you come back for another Yechidus. And the first thing the Alter Rebbe says to the chassid is, if you cannot do what I told you, maybe you're lacking in simcha. You're lacking in positivity. You're lacking, Mendy Kalman wrote a book, The Positivity Bias. It's such a wonderful title. Chassidus, the Rebbe, Chassidus, the Baal Shem Tov, has a positive. If I wanted to be more bold and more, provocative, I'd say religion, that's the truth, has a positivity bias. Any person who believes in the Eibishter, His point of view is that the world is good. And if Chas v'Shalom you don't believe in the Eibishter, your point of view, you have a negativity bias. But the Yiddishkeit and Chassidus, the Baal Shem Tov, the Rebbe, the positivity bias. And the positivity bias says you have to be positive, not just because the world is really God's. And if it's really God's, it's really good, but it's a motivation to get through life. That positivity bias is not just how you look at how the Eibishter runs the world, it's how you look at how you run your own life. So the Chassid comes into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says, you cannot do what I told you to do because you have a negativity bias. You feel like you're going to fail. You have to have a positive. You have to believe you're going to succeed. And you have to have joy, and you have to have alacrity, and so on. And the Chassid comes back a third time. He's back again. And the Rebbe said, what do you want now? He says, not only I can't do what you told me, I can't be positive. I can't be besimcha. Why? And he gives him reasons. And in the last 3 prakim, we had 4 reasons, 4 different reasons. And the Alter Rebbe talked through each one. Physical suffering, spiritual iniquity, confusion about self-identity, as we discussed at length in the last 2 chapters, 27 and 28, and I do want to be as concise as I could be. And the Alter Rebbe addressed each one differently. The Chassid says, Rebbe, I cannot be positive, I cannot be besimcha, and here's my reason. The Alter Rebbe teaches him, no, he could. Each one is a different method. Each complaint is a different complaint. And each solution is a different solution. But the end of all the solutions is that you come back to the space of a positivity bias. That the basis for serving the Eibishter is joy and belief that we will succeed in Avodas Hashem because the Eibishter is going to help us. Now last Sunday, we didn't learn, right? Last Sunday, my daughter and my son-in-law made a Chanukah Sabayis in Albany. One of the happiest reasons to miss the class here, even though I like to teach, but that's, imagine Kinderlach Sabayis in a small shtetl outside of Albany. Albany is Bechlal very small. It's not physically small, it's mentally small. And this is a suburb of Albany. And they, Baruch Hashem, they mention alle mit Gesund, und Hatzlacha, und Bracha, und Simche, und Avoida, und Seichel. I put Seichel first. First, middle, and last. Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. Anyway, so 2 weeks ago we learned. And we learned the last few lines of the previous Perek. And what did we learn? A very interesting thing. Perek Chavches, the end of the last 3 lines, of 5 lines, of chapter 28 are as follows. A person says, I'm failing the test of positivity. I lack simcha. And because I'm failing the positivity test, I can't even approach my avodah because I'm a pessimist, because I have a losing attitude. I have a disbelief in the possibility of me succeeding in the derech that the Alter Rebbe is giving me. The Alter Rebbe said, Poshet, beg. Beg. That's what it says. Yashpil esatzmei v'yischanen, plead. Please, Eibishter, help me. Now the Alter Rebbe gives techniques how to overcome sadness, how to overcome difficulty, how to overcome melancholy, using this technique and this, and then finishes the Perek by saying, and if you can't do that, you can't do this, and 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 you can't do this. So turn to the Rebbe to listen. I tried all the tricks. I went to all the experts, and experts mean Taka experts, the Alter Rebbe, and I can't get past my pessimism. Hab Rachmanis, have mercy on my soul and redeem me from this heaviness and allow me to serve the Eibishter with joy. And the Alter Rebbe finishes the Perek by saying, Hashem is going to help you overcome your difficulty because the Eibishter is selfish and he thinks about himself. We happen to be a piece of him. A Jew is mamish, a piece of the Eibishter. And because a Jew is a piece of the Eibishter, it's in the Eibishter's best interest, it's in God Almighty's best interest, that we should succeed in the avodah that we undertake. That's how the previous Perek finished. But we're not done. What happens if even that doesn't work? So let's talk. How many steps do you have? Step 1, you come to the Alter Rebbe, and he teaches you how to serve Hashem based on your neshama. Step 2, he talks to you about being besimcha, being positive. Step 3, he tells you how to overcome the difficulties that you have in being positive, so you should be able to be positive, and serve Hashem with simcha, so you should be able to undertake and carry through the instructions that you got from the Rebbe. Step 4 is when all the techniques he provides fail, he says to ask for mercy. Step 5, what if the mercy doesn't work? Nothing works. So now the Alter Rebbe goes into a space which is very atypical to Chassidus, and dangerous. Very dangerous. And we had it a little bit in chapter 26, and at the time we talked about it. Now we're going to be revisiting it for 2 prakim and a page. A big arichas. A whole discussion. And the answer is, sometimes in order to get out of your negativity and be positive, you have to become even more negative. You have to break, in other words, in order to heal. This is approximately what we're going to be learning in the next 2 chapters, chapter 29 and chapter 30. And you'll see, at the beginning of chapter 31, the Alter Rebbe is going to bring it home. And when we finish this, we'll talk about how this applies to our generation. So let's begin to read, okay? There are occasions when you're talking about a beinani. A beinani means a person who never sinned. That's pretty interesting. Think about it. And there's 2 kinds of sins. There's a sin of commission, you do something wrong. And then there's a sin of omission. And those are much more difficult, where you miss an opportunity to do something right. A beinani is allegedly a human being, like you and me, who's such a master over himself that he always listens to the Eibishter in the area of Sur Meirah, not doing things that you're not supposed to, and also in the area of Achei Temimim, always taking full advantage of what he must. So we're talking about a beinani. But he's lethargic. He's not able to turn on his engine. He's not able to serve Hashem with the passion that the Alter Rebbe is prescribing. Lapa'amim means occasionally, okay? Itim rabba means very often. Now that's, lapa'amim and itim rabba means sometimes and many times. Now that's a dichotomy, but it's the language of lapa'amim occasionally. V'itim rabbim in many moments. Yesh lahem, it's possible for a beinani to experience what is called timtum halev, that the heart becomes metumtum. Metumtum means blocked. Shenasa ke'even, the person's heart becomes like stone. Now when I read these few lines of Tanya, I create my own translations. I like to translate it as emotional congestedness. We all know what congestion means, right? On the highway, congestion means that the cars are blocking each other, yeah? In your chest, congestion means that the fluid isn't moving in and out and you can't breathe. In avoida, congestion means you can't get you can't arouse yourself. You can't get excited about serving the Eibishter because there's a heaviness like a stone. So that's how I translate the word timtum. And if you're familiar with the Chassidus, there's something called timtum alev. There's emotional congestedness, and there's something called timtum amoyach, intellectual congestedness, which is a much more sensitive issue, which is not raised here in the Tanya Bepashtas, in the simple read. What is the consequence of this? What happens to a person? He's a beinani, good guy, uses his time precisely, has enough power to do what he must and not do what he mustn't, but he doesn't have life. And the reason he doesn't have life because he has this timtum alev, he has this heart is stuck, there's a congestedness in his heart. And the way I'm teaching it to you, and I'm emphasizing those words, he's tried all the methods provided in Perek Vav, and in Perek Zayin, and in Perek Ches, and in and the end of Perek Ches, including the method when all else fails, beg. And none of the methods are working. Nothing is freeing the person from that state of heaviness, from that state of emotional congestedness, and the person cannot get his engine to turn over. You have an air conditioner, so a decompressor is called, a compressor, yeah? And something, put the air conditioner on, and the compressor doesn't go on. Why? Because you forgot to take the foam out of the air conditioner before you put it in the window. Or because the air conditioner is broken. Or because you forgot to put on cool, you just put on fan, right? You want the engine to go on, because that's when the room is going to cool, not just going to blow the hot air from one part of the room to the other. A human being's heart has a compressor. I don't mean the physical heart. And the compressor has to turn on. That's passion. That's fire. And the Alter Rebbe is describing a person, he's doing everything, but it's lethargic. It's a schlep. He's like dragging a limp leg. There's no energy in it. And he gives 2 examples. Number 1, this person finds it impossible to open his heart. That means to get emotionally aroused and passionate, in any way, shape, or form. When he does the work of the heart, which is done during davening. Now you know, because you've been here, and I repeat myself over and over and over and over and over again, that in chapter 12, the Alter Rebbe talks about a Beinoni, and he uses two words: Meluch and Memshala, a king and a dictator. And I explained it to you, that the phrase, the quote that we all know, that's rooted in the Zohar, Moyach Shalit Alalei, that the mind rules over the heart, has two translations. The translation which is more common is that the mind can control the heart. The translation which is less common but far deeper is that the mind can educate the heart. The difference between controlling the heart and educating the heart is, controlling the heart means the heart is going in a different direction, but you hold on to him, like you hold on to the dog that's trying to run away from your leash. Educating the heart means that he should go where you want him. And that's the difference between being a melech, a king over your heart, and a Moshe, a dictator over your heart. The Rebbe points this out in Tanya chapter 12. In other words, the life of a Beinoni is defined by changes in mood. A tzaddik is always the same. For reasons that I cannot defend, a Rosh is also always the same, certainly a Rosh Gomer. But a Beinoni, by definition, fluxes. There are periods in his life or in his day where he's a king over himself, he's like a tzaddik. And there are periods in his life where he's not a king, he's a dictator, he controls himself. His heart is going in a different direction and he controls himself. What's the difference? And the answer is, when the Beinoni davens versus when the Beinoni is doing all other things, including learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. When the Beinoni davens, because davening is, as the Alter Rebbe just said, avodah shabalev, the labor of the heart, the work of the heart. The whole idea of davening is not just reading words, you're doing a meditation, you're doing a hisbonenus to arouse yourself emotionally, to excite yourself emotionally. And during davening, because you're in a shul, and because you're in a, so to speak, safe environment, and you're focusing on the Eibishter, the Beinoni could achieve what the tzaddik experiences all day long. The tzaddik's in love with God. You know why? Because he has only one heart. He has no other interest. A Beinoni is not in love with God, but a Beinoni can experience moments of loving God, and that's during davening. So what happens to a Beinoni who comes to his davening, and the compressor doesn't go on? Shumayf. He's a senior chassid. He's been serving the Eibishter his whole life, serving Hashem in the highest madreg of Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem, and he's used to davening. And when he davens, the compressor goes on, and it gets nice and warm. It gets very, very excited. And for the last 3 weeks, he feels like it's sputtering. It's not happening. Parenthesis, interruption. Lashon Hara, my favorite thing is Lashon Hara. Yesterday I gave a shir, and I said a few Lashon Haras, and when I was finished, the Chavez said, I don't hear no Lashon Hara. I said, you're not Mavinim in Lashon Hara. The Alter Rebbe had a chassid by the name of Rabbi Levi Mistrashel, Rabbi Levi Horowitz. The Horowitzes in Lubavitch, many of them are his descendants. He was a tzaddik. He was a kodesh. Alter Rebbe defeated him, a god, a kodesh, a tzaddik. He was the Mittler Rebbe's competition. When the Mittler Rebbe was a Rebbe, he opened up a competing Chabad in Strashel, in another city, and the Mittler Rebbe wasn't happy about it. It's a long story, and he was a very great person. He was older than the Mittler Rebbe, and him and the Mittler Rebbe had been very close. And for reasons that are not important, they had to go their own separate ways. They went their separate ways. It's a very long time ago. So, one of the stories about Strashel that's brought in Sfarim is the following story. The Alter Rebbe divided up his Talmidim, his Chassidim, amongst different, what you would call senior mashpiyim. The Alter Rebbe had a pyramid. The Alter Rebbe really, the only Chabad Rebbe that really had a pyramid, in other words, where a chassid was answerable to a mashpiyah, and that mashpiyah was answered to a greater mashpiyah. And at the tip of the pyramid was the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe had a pyramid. From the times of the Mittler Rebbe, I think the pyramid started to collapse. Today there's no pyramid. Each one of us has a personal relationship with the Rebbe for more reasons than one. It's just how it is. But the Alter Rebbe had a real pyramid because he had real chassidim. He had people who belonged on a pyramid. One of them, recently, one of them was his own brother, the Maril. One of them was his son, the Mittler Rebbe. And although in the Hayom Yom it only mentions those two, but the Rabban Strashel also was on that pyramid, at least for a time. So the Chassidim were divided up into groups. The senior Chassidim were answerable to the Maril, to the Alter Rebbe's brother. And if you wanted to go to Yechidus the Alter Rebbe, the Maril had to say that you need one. In other words, if you came to the Ma'alil with a question in Avodas Hashem, and he could help you, you didn't get a Yechidus. Because Yechidus wasn't a social call, it was instruction. If the Rebbe's brother could help you, that was enough. Serve the Eibishter with the information that you have. You didn't get a Yechidus unless you needed a Yechidus. The Mittel Rebbe was the youngest. He was involved with the Younger Light. And Rabbi Aaron Halevi, who was older than the Mittel Rebbe, was involved with what we call the Mittel Light. Chassidim in the middle. The Mittel Rebbe was constantly ill. Mittel Rebbe was born with respiratory trouble. He suffered his whole life with his lungs. So it seems. He was not a healthy man. That he lived 54 years probably was already a nest. The greatness of the Mittel Rebbe is unimaginable. But physically, from what I understand, he was from youth deficient. That's why the Alter Rebbe was so upset when he fasted and so on. The Alter Rebbe watched him like a hawk. The Alter Rebbe watched him. He made sure the Mittel Rebbe took care of his health. In contrast to the Maggid and Avraham the Malach, who passed away at the grand old age of 37. So the Mittel Rebbe was Maidach Yomim, he lived till 54, versteht? Alter Rebbe watched his son, he watched him. And he made sure that he ate, and he made sure that he slept, he didn't let him fast. And if Mittel Rebbe ever sort of stepped out of line, the Alter Rebbe would reprimand him and say, take care of your health. He was very careful. Alter Rebbe, we know this. Anyway, the Mittel Rebbe was sick. So because he was sick, he couldn't do his role as the, so to speak, the senior mashpiyim of the Younger Light. So the Alter Rebbe said to the Baron Strasheller, you're in charge of the Mittel Light, you're overseeing the Chassidim of the middle years. Until the battle, as the Alter Rebbe called it, until the Mittel Rebbe recovers, you'll do double duty. You'll also oversee the younger Chassidim. The Baron Strasheller was a giant, but he wasn't a Rebbe. The difference between a Rebbe and not a Rebbe, the Rebbe doesn't project. When Rebbe talks to a Chassid, he doesn't tell the Chassid where he's holding. He tells the Chassid where the Chassid is holding. But that's a trick that only a Rebbe could do. All of our relationships are projections. As much as we don't want it to be, as much as we dispersonalize everybody in every conversation with another person is really a little bit, speak to that person as if they're a reflection. We can't help it. So Rabbi Aaron Halevi Strasheller projected. And he was an incredibly tough man. He was a very powerful person. He achieved such greatness in his whole life. You don't become, in the words of the Frierdiker Rebbe, a Gon and a Kodesh and a Tzaddik by eating whatever it is, crackers with, I forgot what I'm supposed to say now, peanut butter. It's very, very intense. It's very powerful. So when he was a Madrich and a Mashpia, that power came across. But it came across in a way that was hurtful to the Makablim, and they were not Kalim for it. They couldn't take it. In other words, the Chassidim that he was in charge of always, they were older. And they could handle his Gvuras. But when he did double duty and he became in charge of the younger light, of the younger Chassidim, and they were probably teenagers, they had great minds, but they were very young, the Gvura was very severe and he was hurting them. During this period, during that time, that Rabbi Aaron Strasheller was being madrich also the Talmidim of the Mittel Rebbe, Rabbi Aaron Strasheller experienced what we just read. That he started to feel like his engine is sputtering. It's daven sich nicht. It's not going. The avodah to which he was accustomed was waning. He felt like he's doing the same things and he's not getting the same result. And it bothered him so much, he went into the Alter Rebbe at the Yechidus, and he went in whenever he wanted. He probably had an open door. So he came to the Alter Rebbe and he says, I don't know why, but lately, reading the words inside, I do the same things I did, I studied the way I studied, I learned the way I learned, I think the way I think, but I'm not getting as passionate as I used to. So the Alter Rebbe answered him, An ben führt sich mit anderen mit Gvuras, führt man sich mit dir meilo euchet mit Gvuras. When you treat others critically, you are treated from on high with greater criticism. The Alter Rebbe told him that you were being strong on the younger light, so the Eibush is giving you midah keneged midah. He wants more from you. You want more from them? And he wants more from them in a way which is really too much, so they're demanding more from you, Milmaila, in a way that's too much. It's a moidendik amais. And now, mi lashon hara la lashon hara. You can't say one lashon hara. Every lashon hara needs a brother. So there's a valdik azach. It's printed now, this story. There was a yid by the name of Reb Shmuel Zalman of who was a very, very great chassid. I do not remember him. He moved to Eretz Yisrael the year I was born. So I don't remember him. He passed away in 1975. My father talks about him. He was a very special person. Again, I never met him, but you hear he was unusual. He was a great chassid. He was a very unusual man. He was very close to the rebbe. And Shmuel Zalman had one son. His name was Yisrael Yosef, Yossi Zalmanov. He's my father's age, a little older than my father. They lived in yeshiva together. His bar mitzvah was in 1950. My father's bar mitzvah was 1951. He's a year older than my father, let's say, or less a little bit. So he had a yechidus after the Frierdiker Rebbe had passed away, but before the Rebbe was officially Rebbe. He went in with his father. He was a 13-year-old. And he had a yechidus, and he wrote it down. And the Rebbe edited that yechidus, and he gave it to the publishers of the Sefer Yemei Bereshis, and they published the yechidus. You can see his own hand and the Rebbe's corrections, and then they typed it up. As a 13-year-old boy, he must have been very special. He asked the Rebbe how come in his life as a Jew, he feels fluctuations. Sometimes he's more motivated, sometimes he's less motivated. And the Rebbe gave him a very profound answer, which I don't think the Rebbe was in the habit of giving, because I don't think the Rebbe had many Yossi Zalmanovs coming to Yechidus. And the Rebbe told him, time in heaven has moods. In other words, it's not about you. Like, for example, the 3 weeks is a time of Akpikabah, time of Katnus. Hashem is more removed. So you can do the same avodah and you get the less result, and it's not because you're doing something wrong. In the story with Rabbi Aaron Strashela, the Alter Rebbe says that there's something wrong with your avodah, you're being too critical of the young light. In this story, the Rebbe says to a boy in America, in other words, your avodah Hashem fluctuates because Hashem is sometimes closer, so it goes better. Hashem is sometimes farther, so you have to work harder. But there's not any chesed in your avodah. That's a very interesting answer. And the Rebbe answered him because for him, it was emes. I mean, most kids, the Rebbe said to him, because you ate too much breakfast. That's why. Why did daven just like yesterday? Because you had an extra piece of cake before davening. One is enough. You don't need two. It's not that complicated. But for real people, there's real answers. So getting to the point, all this is leading to a point that this Benyani comes into the Alter Rebbe and says, Rebbe, I'm doing the right thing, but I have no fire. I'm doing the same thing I did last week. I'm at the same schedule, the same preparation, but I'm not getting the same result. My davening remains a fight. It never, so to speak, graduates to the point that we call that during the duration of the davening, I'm a king over my heart. It's not happening. And he's complaining to the Alter Rebbe. He's not complaining why, because why is a waste of time. He's complaining, what should I do about it? How do I remedy it? How do I fix it? He says, number one, the garbage is the number two. Lepa'amim, 5 lines into chapter 29. It's 3 lines from the bottom of the page. Lepa'amim, occasionally, leyucha lehilocha mima yetzeh. The Beinani finds himself incapable of fighting with his Yetzer Hara, not about Avedis Chas v'Sholom. A Beinani does one Aved, is not a Beinani anymore. And then the answer is Tshuva. He is a Beinani, but he's lacking passion. This lack of passion shows itself in inability to daven the way he would like, or it shows itself in another way, that he doesn't have the koyach to fight with his Yetzer Hara, lekadesh atzmei b'mutar lei, to make himself holy when it comes to things that are permitted, because the heaviness of his heart. Alter Rebbe is very careful to describe a Beinani who's struggling only emotionally and not behaviorally. Because the moment the Beinani struggles behaviorally, he's not a Beinani anymore. And this is the second example. That there is a concept which you have at the end of chapter 27 called iskafye b'dvarim hamutarim. The things that are permitted, like the expression is, was memeg darf nicht. Even if it's permitted, you don't need it. I just told you a story a few minutes ago that a man told me yesterday in shul that his mother was fasting for him. He told me, my mother was fasting because the son inside was causing her, and the Rebbe told her to stop fasting and to be mate neder. And the Rebbe said that you should do 2 things instead. There's something called a tainas dibur. You can fast with words, The Rebbe also said, eat only healthy food. Fast with food. Now, food which is tasty is not awesome. It's not awesome, it's not prohibited, it's mutter. So the Alter Rebbe introduced us to this notion of what's called iskafia b'dvarim hamutarim. Things that are permitted, that if you don't need, you shouldn't have them. In other words, bending yourself, not only holding yourself back from doing an aveda chas v'shalom, but bending yourself, it's allowed and is permitted, and nevertheless you're telling yourself no because you don't need it. And Alter Rebbe spoke very, very highly about the rewards of this avodah. That even though we're not talking about an aveda, we're talking about a permitted thing. And the person says, I'm going to discipline myself, I'm going to, quote, control myself in this area, it has great reward. 4 different points, which I'm not going to repeat now. We learned it in chapter 27. We actually learned it in the last 6-7 weeks. Recently enough for me to remember teaching it. It's only a pedic ago, at the end of chapter 27. But here, this is not Avedis. It's simply a lack of growth. So this Beinani, who finds himself in a state of lethargy, what I call emotional congestionedness, timtum alev, comes to Alter Rebbe and he says, Rebbe, it's not going. Number 1, my davening lacks passion. Number 2, my ability to control myself about things that I'm allowed, but I don't need, is diminished. Because that's not a sin. If a person eats a piece of cake, it's not an aveda, it's just not a mitzvah. And there's a very high standard where even something which is not an aveda, as long as it's not a mitzvah, you don't want it because you don't need it. And he's struggling with this. So Alter Rebbe finds 2 things that represent timtum in the life of a bein, a human being who doesn't do wrong. And yet, he's complaining that there is a lethargy, there is an emotional congestedness in his heart. This Yiddishkeit lacks fire, and the lack of fire with Yiddishkeit has to do with the fact that he can't get his fire burning. Can't get his fire to run. Passion. And it shows itself in 2 ways. Number 1, his davening. And number 2, his worldly interests are becoming too dominant in his life. They're controlling him more than he was controlling them. And he's complaining about it. So there are 2 different ideas. One is my davening lacks passion. And the other is my discipline in permitted things is waning. And the root of both of them is the same thing. There's something about this person's spiritual condition which is called timtum. He's stuck emotionally. He can't get the engine to rev up. Now the way I'm explaining it to you is that it's a continuation. You come to the Alter Rebbe, he teaches you how to serve the Eibishter. You come back to the Alter Rebbe, you say you can't, he tells you simcha. You come back again and say you can't do simcha, he tells you to deal with the simcha. You come back and you can't even do the method, I'll just beg. So when your all else fails, you come again, oitcha. This is like visit 5 or 6. I don't know how many visits you've had, but now you're saying, Rebbe, my begging is not working. So when the Alter Rebbe runs out of options, he goes to a place where he really doesn't want to go. That sometimes when a person is stuck, the answer is, to use a cliche, is to hit rock bottom, to make it worse, emotionally, not practically. Because this breaks the hold of Klippa, as you're going to see at length. And he begins by saying, V'zois he eitza hayutza. I'm just going to read the words and translate, and I'm stopping the class. This is the advised solution. Bezeir HaKadosh, and this is brought in Zayt. The last line on page 70. The Amar Rav Mesivta Began Eden. The Rosh Yeshiva in Gan Eden said, we don't know who Rav Mesivta Began Eden is, but whoever is the Rosh Yeshiva in Gan Eden, I want you to know that everybody in the Gemara who is called Rav or Rab Abba or whatever it is, Rabba and Rava, their first name was Abba. Abba. Many of the Ameroyim, Rabba, Rava, Rabba Machon, Rabba Nachmeni, and so on and so forth, they were all Abba. That was their name, Abba. Rav was called Abba. So Rav, let's say he was called Abba also. I don't know, why not, if we're making it up. And he said the following words. Top of page, Lamed Vav Nad, Leisolig Bein Nehera. If you have a piece of wood, and it refuses to burn, so you splinter it, Break it up into smaller spindles and it'll be easier to catch. A big log, even if it's dry, is not going to catch fire with a match. But splinters will. Gufa de leisaluk beinaheded in ishmasa. So the Zohar says, when the body refuses to be ignited by the fire of the neshama, mevach and leichuli, you have to smash it. Now, this is literally a last resort. In chapter 26, when this issue came up, I compared it to chemotherapy, to radiation treatment. It saves lives, but it's poison. In the language of the thinking of Chassidus that has an absolute positivity bias, bringing upon yourself sadness and negativity is poison. But sometimes you don't have a choice. And that's the issue that we're learning about here. Okay, questions or comments? Or otherwise we're going to break and do Hayom Yom. Okay, I'll see you in a minute.